Okay, thanks everyone for being here. And we're going to be talking about this lovely book here that was made by artist Jessica Peterson. That's why we're here tonight. Jessica created this book for the exhibition at WMA Kudzu Soliloquy. That show is going to close this weekend, Saturday at 4 o'clock. So if you can stop by before then, definitely go check it out. I want to take time to thank the Alabama Humanities Association for funding the roundtable discussion tonight, and also thanks to the Alabama State Council on the Arts for supporting the creation of this book. So just to kind of talk about the book just a little bit before we get into it, it's an accordion-bound artist book about the Wiregrass region's folklore and ecosystem. The wiregrass has a unique ecology dependent on the routine burning of the landscape. The book explores the delicate relationship between humans, actual wiregrass, and the longleaf piney forest. So Peterson mixes ecological facts with the region's historical Southern Gothic narratives, including folk remedies, superstitions, folklore, and stories collected from the area. It's a 100 edition book. It's letterpressed and laser printed. Also, I just want to say that Jessica hand bound every single one of them. So it's pretty special. If you want to purchase one, I'll drop a link in the chat box. If you want to purchase it online, you can. Or if you want to go to WMA, they have it there in their gallery shop to purchase. So Jessica Peterson is a book artist, letterpress printer, and teacher based in New Orleans, Louisiana. She operates a Southern letterpress, providing letterpress printing, design services, and workshops in printing and book arts. She has an MFA in book arts from the University of Alabama and a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her artist books are collected in private and public libraries around the world. And also I should mention this book she made a special hardback copy, two of them. One will go in the Wiregrass archives and then one will be in WMA's permanent collection. So very exciting. Okay, and then a lot of the book, what leans heavily on Dr. Jerrilyn McGregory's research that she's done. She's quite literally wrote the book on the Wiregrass. Her career began working for the Philadelphia Folklife Project during graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, where she obtained a PhD in folklore and folk life. Later, she was offered a tenure track job at the University of Georgia, and soon thereafter, Wiregrass Country beckoned her to conduct ethnographic research in a little-known region of the South, Wiregrass. She has since published 3 monographs and a book that recently won the Chicago Prize in Folklore called One Grand Noise. She served as the president of the Florida Folklore Society. She's chaired the Florida Folklife Program as well as the American Folklife Society. And then now to Dr. Olliff. He is an Alabama historian that is here at Troy University in Dothan. He received his PhD in U.S. history from Auburn University and became a member of the Academy of Certified Archivists in 2013. He was promoted to professor of history at Troy University Dothan campus in 2017. In 2002, Olliff became the founding director of the Wiregrass Archives at Troy University Dothan campus, where he teaches in the Department of History and Philosophy. His research concerns the progressive era in Alabama. He edited The Great War in the Heart of Dixie, Alabama during World War I, and Getting Out of the Mud, the Alabama Good Roads Movement, and State Highway Administration, both of those were published by the University of Alabama Press. So, okay, I'm going to bounce out of this conversation. Just to let the audience know, if you have any questions, feel free to queue them up in the chat box. We will do a short Q&A after the roundtable discussion, but as they're talking, if you think of something and you want to write it, we'll get to it towards the end. Okay.
Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to hear this to be together on Zoom to talk about the Wiregrass region. I'm very honored to have Dr. McGregory and Dr. Olliff as part of this conversation. Like, as a visual artist, I I don't usually know that much about the things that I'm making books about until I start making books about them. So the people who are on this this presentation are instrumental to my understanding of the Wiregrass region, and it's really important to have their voices. I'm honored just to be included in the conversation with them. And thanks to all of you for coming and listening to this. The way this is going to work is I'm going to talk about the project, this book project, and then Dr. Olliff and Dr. McGregory are going to talk a little bit about their work and research in the Wiregrass area. And then we'll open it up for comments and questions and kind of have a small roundtable discussion about anything that comes up. It's a little bit informal towards the end. And I think that you'll see that there's some overlaps between all three of our presentations, and they're all going to be short. So if you're already computer worry at the end of the day, don't get stressed out. We're not going to keep you on Zoom forever. Holly asked if she had seen some of my work, some of my previous book arts work, and asked if I could make a book about the Wiregrass region. And I, as I say in the colophon of this book, my knowledge of the Wiregrass region is based on me driving to the beach from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and stopping halfway in Dothan to eat lunch. And that was like really my primary experience. So I was like, I'll see how this is going to go. But as soon as I started researching the Wiregrass region, I was astounded by how much amazing history and what a unique area and ecosystem and culture developed there, and how shocking it is that people aren't just talking about it all the time and traveling from other parts of the United States to go visit Dothan in the Wiregrass region. So it was a really, I feel really grateful to have learned a lot in the process of making this project. This is the cover of the book, and I kind of view this book as like a composite of all of the academic research that I could find about the Wiregrass region put in an artist book. So one of the voices I've relied on heavily to make the book is the voices of Jack Solomon and Olivia Solomon, who worked at Troy State University for a long time and had their students go out into the area around Troy State and collect stories from the region of the Wiregrass and other parts of central Alabama. So they published, I have a picture of the cover of the book, but they published a book about ghost stories and ghouls that has a lot of lists of superstitions. So throughout the book, I put these little boxes that are like superstitions these student groups collected from the rural regions of Alabama in the late 70s. Okay, let's see. So I was born and raised in Rochester, New York, and I moved to Alabama in 2006 to attend the University of Alabama's MFA in Book Arts program, which is a program that emphasizes learning how to make a book from nothing. So it was originally started to teach librarians how to make books and deal with books, but it evolved into a place where really big book nerds like myself could go and get a master's degree in how to make paper, do letterpress printing, and do hand book binding, and consider the book as a whole important object. And I was already really interested in that concept, but going to Alabama and learning how to make paper and do letterpress printing really opened up a field for me, a huge field of interest for me, especially that the stories that are told using book arts processes like design and letterpress printing and handmade paper and hand book binding are stories that should have like some reverence, that need reverence when they're told. So binding them and creating them in this way gives them some implied reverence. So the first book I made was about the effects of Hurricane Katrina in Biloxi, Mississippi, not in New Orleans. And so this is a handmade paper book. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Then I made a book about somebody in Alabama challenged me that I was making a lot of books about the South, but I hadn't made a book about my own history. So I made a book about Rochester, New York, and a race riot that happened there and my relationship to understanding the South. I was talking with Dr. McGregory, and she and I shared that both our parents were horrified when we decided to move to the South. And then both our parents came to love the South and visit frequently. So it's a really nice tie. And then after I graduated from graduate school, I moved to this small town called Gordo, Alabama, that Glenn House, who's a really famed Alabama artist who passed away in 2000, 2015 or 14. He collected. There was a presentation from Wiregrass earlier. His work was part of the exhibition that my book was a part of. He was collecting printing presses, and then he decided to collect printers. So I moved. He converted a grocery store in Gordo into a print shop, and then he asked printers to move in there and use the print shop. So I moved to Gordo, and I made a book about Gordo and the stories that were being told there about this museum that had existed there called Masil's Museum of Miscellanea. And it was the book is all the stories of the museum based on people's memories. So I think from that work, I really value the idea of telling these stories that people haven't heard a lot or have forgotten in this way that honors the narrative through book arts. So the book that I made for the Wiregrass Museum to talk about the culture of the wiregrass it's not handmade paper, and it's mostly laser printed, and it's hand bound. It's an accordion do-si-do. So I chose this structure because snakes are really part of the wiregrass folklore and also the natural ecology of the Wiregrass region. And if you can kind of see, this is a top view of the book. It looks like a snake a little bit in the way that the cover wraps around the book. This is one of I've made books without a lot of letterpress printing before, and actually I found it really refreshing because making books letterpress printed, although it's very beautiful, it takes like 2 years to make, and it's just the printing side of it. So it was really exciting to not have that as a constraint in making this project. You can see the book is like, also it's, I think it's like 5 by 9, which is a really important handheld size because the stories in it are really intimate, and I want people to feel like they're holding the stories in their hands when they're holding the book. So the size is also a really deliberate decision. This is the first page. All of the images in the book are copyright free images that came from historical archives online, or that were mostly, there was a lot of information about the Wiregrass region from like 1920 to 1970, because that's a time when logging became really important and tree farms became really important in Alabama. So there was a lot of research about the Wiregrass area. And what I found that was really interesting about this region is that there was a lot of lightning, which caused, it's one of the areas of the United States where the most lightning strikes. And that caused, I just kind of felt like there's a natural flow to the narrative of this region where there was a lot of lightning. These plants evolved to use the lightning to their benefit by doing low relief fires when caught by lightning. And then the animals and plants adapted to those fires. And then when humans came around, the humans were able to use those fires for their benefit to keep out snakes and to create really good hunting and cattle grazing grounds. So and then when lightning didn't strike, the humans kind of learned how to use fire for their benefit for the same purpose. So the story of this book is about how this region of Alabama was like a fire ecology, which is a really unusual ecology. And in modernity, this fire ecology had existed for millennium, and when in modernity in the last 100 years is a time when humanity decided, oh, forest fires aren't good and we need to get rid of them. And now in this last decade or so, people have realized that controlled burns are really important to this unique ecology. So it's one of those stories where we already knew what was the right thing to do, and then we forgot for like 100 years, and now we're trying to do the right thing again. You can see it, these are all natives. I just have the first part of the book's like kind of about the plants and animals in the Wiregrass region. So there's a list of all the native species of plants and animals that you don't find anywhere else outside the Wiregrass region. I really enjoyed learning about the animals. Snakes are a really important part of the Wiregrass region, which I mentioned, and there's like stories of a native indigenous stories of a tie snake, which is a snake that's really strong and comes out of the water and attacks people. And then what I think my favorite snake story, a wheel snake who turns into a circle by taking its mouth and its tail in its mouth and starts rolling after people, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for bad reasons. There's also the gopher tortoise, and I think that this is from Dr. McGregory's interview with somebody that in Florida, this is a Florida story, but almost every grocery store had a line of pens that held gopher tortoises of different sizes, and you would bring in a load of gopher tortoises and trade them for groceries. And this story is a man coming in with a 25-cent gopher tortoise and buying 10 cents worth of something and putting his gopher in the 25-cent pen and taking out a 15-cent gopher tortoise for change. So those are really yeah, it's a great story. I love that. The second section of the book has some of the folklore, and I really wanted to include like indigenous stories because I think that's a really important part of Alabama and the South's history that we also are starting to reappreciate as a nation, kind of. So this is a Muskogee story of how rabbit brought fire to the people, and I used a website called I'll put it in the chat, but it's a really interesting website where you can just log on and find the place where you live or occupy, and it shows you all the overlapping layers of indigenous tribes from the history that can be discovered. So I use that. I think, yeah. So there's a story of how rabbit brought fire to the people. There's a story of a wheel snake, of a driver going to wagon going to Sellers and getting whipped by a snake rolling around in a wheel. I felt like, and this is really something that Dr. McGregory talks a lot about in her book, that there's a lot of like very scary life and death stories, because I think it was a really rough region when folklore was being told and retold orally. There was a lot of death and a lot of snake deaths and injuries, and just it was kind of hard living. So I think these stories kind of make people feel, they tell lessons, but they also make people feel like kind of comforted by the amount of the brutality and the awfulness of rural life that can exist. This is the story of the Bill Skeeto story, which it's a story of somebody who went to fight in the Civil War and came back to take care of his wife, and he got hung for deserting the army. And the hole that was made for his hanging can't be filled in. So still, when you go by this hole by this bridge, if you try to fill in the hole that's there, it'll be empty in a hole again the next morning. So it's like a haunted hole. And Holly, who introduced this talk, had told all of us that, like, she used to drive. It's like a huge spot of interest and intrigue in the Dothan area of how this hole that doesn't fill in, and the ghost stories around it. And there's also some retribution because the people who hung him all died terrible deaths, kind of like so it was it's a moral tale as well. The last section talks about the biology, or the kind of the history of the Wiregrass region. So and I think that I don't want to talk about this that much because the experts are on this Zoom meeting, but I thought it was really just amazing how much humans adapted to use the longleaf and wiregrass ecosystem for their benefit. Because there was controlled burning a lot, it was great grazing area. It was not great area for raising cotton, so plantation culture that existed in other parts of Alabama didn't exist in this region. And in the early 20th century, the U.S. Department of Agriculture got really excited about making tree farms. So the leader of that division said, we have to get rid of all these virgin forests because it's just like a lot of scrubby trees, and they're all old and falling apart. So we just need to cut down all the trees. And so people started believing that. Because of that, the burning in the Wiregrass region became more human provoked than lightning provoked. And after the logging of the virgin forests, loblolly and slash pine were planted in the region, which are much better for making tree farms because they grow a lot faster than the longleaf pine, but they don't respond well to controlled or natural burning. So there was a lot of forest fires still happening. You can see that in the 1930s, the Forest Service reported that approximately half of the forest fires happened in the 11 southeastern states, 90% caused by humans. This is just from a report from that era, so it's like hard to know how they got that fact, but they decided that they had to figure out how to stop the burning. So they hired a psychologist, which is a really interesting approach for the government to do, and he issued this report about why people, he like went and talked to a whole bunch of people, actually not in Alabama, but mostly in Appalachia, about why they felt like they needed to set forest fires. And this is a really problematic report because it really comes from like a written by someone who had never really been in the region and just kind of went down and checked it out for a little while. His conclusion is that people were just bored and poor and dumb and they just needed more stuff to do and they would stop lighting forest fires, which is ridiculous given this rich and amazing history that I've just talked about. Um, so that prompted a whole bunch of really interesting things that affected the whole country, like Smokey the Bear and the Bambi movie all kind of came out of that research, where there were these national pushes for people to stop doing controlled burns of their forests and property. So you can see that because the longleaf pine and the wiregrass depend on controlled burning to regenerate, when the burning stopped, the longleaf forests also declined. So you can see that when DeSoto came through Alabama in 1540, and there's some really beautiful descriptions that his the people he was with wrote of these like rolling beautiful forests. It was supposed to be, he said they estimated it was like 24 million acres, and now there's only 1 million acres of longleaf pine forest remaining. So I just wanted to say briefly that I've sometimes I designed this book so that the text in brown is kind of my words, and then the text in any other font is somebody else's words, which is a questionable way for if you're an academician to do anything. But I cited as many of the sources as I could, and I don't know. I think like these books that I read, I was so inspired by, and I think that art is a good way to bridge academic research and to kind of reinterpret people's research in a different way that has a different audience. And I was really excited to provide like another like venue to present all of these really interesting bits of research. This is Dr. McGregor's book that she mentioned that she hates the cover, and I was also surprised when I saw the cover. I was like, well, this book's not going to be very helpful, and I was like, this book's amazing. So you can't judge a book by its cover at all. And I know that I also work in book printing and publishing, and I know that a lot of the time book covers the author has no control over the book cover. So this is another, I found a lot of Fred Shelton Watson's books to be really interesting. And this is, he was like an accountant in Dothan who just got really interested in history. And the story of Bill Skeeto's hanging, which has there's a number of different tellings of that, but he went and found the original newspaper article of that hanging and then wrote that in his book. So that's the story version that's in this book, because it's like the most direct source I could find of the original story. And then these are the two books that I use that have they're really just collections bound in commercial publishing bindings, but they're collections of tall tales, superstitions, and folk recipes and remedies. And here's my contact information if anyone wants to contact me about or has any questions or comments. And again, my name's Jessica Peterson. I'm gonna pass this to Dr. Olliff, pass the mic to Dr. Olliff, and then we'll move on to Dr. McGregory. And I'm going to stop sharing for a minute.
Okay, y'all should be seeing my screen right now. And thank you very much, Jessica, for turning this over to me. And thank you all for inviting me here and for attending this. My presentation probably going to be a little bit more formal, but that's the kind of guy I am. So my co-panelists have been talking about, and we'll talk about, the culture of the Wiregrass region, which is this distinguishing characteristic and really the reason we're here tonight. Distinguishing characteristic, the culture, yeah, or as we might say here in the Wiregrass, we make our own fun, and sometimes that involves arson. So what I want to talk about, however, is the land and some of the migration history that undergirds the folk life and the culture that has developed here in maybe the last 150 years or so as European settlers and ultimately African-American settlers have moved Native American peoples out of here. So the first thing I want, or the thing we have to begin with, if I can figure out how to, there we go, make this work, is we begin with the land. And the region draws its name from this tufted grass, wiregrass, obviously, that once covered the floor of all these park-like forests of longleaf pine that stretch from the along the coastal plain from the Chesapeake Bay down through here into West Texas. And wiregrass itself, the grass here, is the first fodder that greens up in the spring. And it provided food first to a large deer population, and then as poor white drovers moved in, to free range, or as we really call them, feral cattle. And to be sure, there were millions of acres of longleaf forests that formed the symbiotic relationship with the wiregrass. Now, why did they have this close symbiotic relationship? Fire. Is because of fire. Wiregrass and longleaf pines are fire ecology plants. That means they need fire to germinate seeds. But not just any kind of fire. They need a low intensity fire that burns off the underbrush without destroying the roots of the wiregrass or the seedlings of the longleaf pines. Here you see a maintenance guy doing a controlled burn in the 1990s of a wiregrass patch in the Chipola River Wildgrass Management Area. Now, one authority on the ancient forests that covered all of present-day Alabama estimates that 10% of the state burned every year. That meant that every forest in the state, and the state was covered in forest, burned every decade. This kept them clear of underbrush, and down here, it allowed that symbiotic relationship between longleaf pine and wiregrass to continue on. Early human inhabitants of the wiregrass area were the Native American precursors of the Creek Nation. They lived in the river valleys primarily, and there they cultivated extensive gardens that they supplemented with hunting and gathering. They were, however, few in number down here in the wiregrass region. By the way, we have two remaining mound sites along the Chattahoochee River. One's at Colomoke in Georgia, and the other is at the mouth of Omussee Creek here in Houston County. The culture of the wiregrass region's people is a direct result of white settlement patterns and the history of 18th century European imperial warfare in what we would call the old Southwest of the American colonies, British American colonies. Not only did Spain, England, and France vie for control of this old Southwest, I'm sorry, I think I called it Northwest a second ago, this old Southwest of what became Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, but so did the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and for our purposes in the wiregrass in particular, the Creek nations. After 1783, the United States entered the fray. The U.S. established its border with Spain in 1795, and you see that right along here, that heavy dotted line. But it wasn't until 1819 that Spain ceded Florida to the U.S. So that boundary, again, this hard boundary right through here, and the really swampy area of Spanish Florida in the northern Florida area of the wiregrass limited westward movement of white migrants into the area of the Wiregrass. Now, wealthier settlers of Alabama could take a boat around Florida, come up through Mobile Bay, and then go up the the Tombigbee River and the Alabama River and settle in the basins there, mostly in the Black Belt cotton areas. So plantation tended to develop there. Poor settlers traveled this federal road from Milledgeville across the creek area down to Fort Stoddard. But after the defeat of the Red Sticks in 1814, this first creek cession opened up and allowed a path, and I'm going to show you here, for poor white settlers and a very few number of slaves to come into the Wiregrass of Georgia and Alabama, south of the Creek Nation and north of Spain. Now that pathway is a little bit easier to see in this 1823 map by Henry Tanner. It was only in 1836 that this area of Creek and Cherokee nations reverted to the United States, reverted to the states as the Creeks and the Cherokees were forced out. This is the last of their territories east of the Mississippi. This was open to white settlement and enslaved chattel to make the Black Belt cotton region work. On the other hand, you can still see down through here this open area prior to 1836 that allowed poor, mostly white settlers to make their way through without having to go through the Creek Nation. My father's family is an example of how the Wiregrass was both populated and how it was used as a passageway westward. So my oldest ancestor, who was from North Carolina, received a large land grant near Savannah, and then his progeny settled slightly to the west of Savannah near Statesboro and Swainsboro. His grandson, my great-great-grandfather, moved to Fort Gaines and then to Edison, Georgia in 1856, which is right around in here. One of his sons, my great-grandfather's brother, moved to what is now Houston County, this area here, in 1856. I'm sorry, in the 1880s or the 1890s. My grandfather, who was born in Early County in 1899, moved to Montgomery, Alabama after going west to harvest wheat, and then after marrying my grandmother in Luverne, Alabama. So in the course of 6 generations, my family followed that Scots-Irish migration of poor people from the Carolinas through Georgia, and then after Creek removal into the Wiregrass and beyond. What we today call the Wiregrass no longer extends from the Chesapeake Bay into West Texas. Culturally, it covers most of South Georgia, some of Southeast Alabama, and some of North Florida. Now, for my purposes, the purposes of my institution, the Wiregrass Archives, I've located my geographical collecting area in the western half of that current range of the Wiregrass. These 30 counties inside the Pentagon on this map. And finally, let me whine at you just a little bit. One of the other Wiregrass characteristics is that publicly facing cultural resources here are underdeveloped, and repositories like the Wiregrass Archives are small and few. This lack of repositories means that very few scholarly books are produced from archival records. In fact, what you're looking at here are what I could find fairly easily in WorldCat, although each one of these books has multiple records in WorldCat. But these are really a lot of the books that have been produced about the Wiregrass Country or significant component of it as a whole. I put in hub of the Wiregrass simply because Dothan considers itself to be hub of the Wiregrass. And so I had to just chuck that in a little bit. But two of these books are by our next panelist. The fact that there is a dearth of secondary sources, secondary academic sources for the Wiregrass means that Jessica's book is quite the achievement and quite exceptional. So thank you for joining me, and I will turn this over to Dr. McGregory.
Hello, everyone. I think my presentation will be more anecdotal in a sense because I have so many memories in terms of the interviews conducted. Driving, I think I told others that I would drive 20,000 miles a year, just traveling through Wiregrass, conducting interviews every weekend and all summer long. I even actually, when I was at the University of Georgia, because it turns out that Athens is 5 hours away from the Wiregrass border. And so I did talk the university into giving me a summer, very small grant so I could rent a trailer in Cairo, which is in Georgia. And basically, in terms of the Wiregrass, it's important to mention that Georgia has about, I think, 150 counties, and about 50 of them are designated as being part of the Wiregrass region. So that's about a third of their counties. Whereas, and I think you can recall from the map you just saw, the degree to which about 9 counties, I think actually 9 counties in Alabama are designated as part of the Wiregrass region, and another 9 counties in the panhandle of Florida. And so basically, in terms of the region, there's a lot of things that are stable just in terms of the experiences in the Wiregrass Country that set them apart from the rest of the South and its folk life. For one thing, the term Wiregrass was deemed derogatory in terms of talking about the farmers who settled there. Really soon, or right before, maybe 3 years before the Revolutionary War, the land was a land grant, as was also mentioned. But the thing is that the land was basically poor soil. The quality of the land was poor primarily because, it could not grow cotton. It was infertile, basically. And I think Jessica also has pointed out in terms of when she was speaking of the gopher turtles, that their actual economy was based on bartering, a bartering system, in the sense that when I would interview specifically white farmers, they would talk about their family heritage, much as you heard it transmitted here today, and say things like they are descendants of folk who never had a nickel to their name. And so that's why the bartering system and why Wiregrass was conducive, as also mentioned, in terms of raising their farm animals. They would, as a collective, go out to tag them every year, the new calves, so that everyone would know who owned what animal. But in the same token, they just were able to graze on their own. I know, for coming from Indiana, when I finally reached the Wiregrass Country, I'm like, where are the barns? It's not like Indiana or the Midwest or anywhere else or other places in the South when it came to the fact that it took me a while to actually learn that that's because they didn't have the capability of actually becoming farmers in that kind of, I guess they stereotypical way in terms of farming certain crops, and why eventually they became known as diversified farmers, because once they were able to find that bat guano, or actually was a good fertilizer for their soil, they diversified, and therefore they're known for their peanuts, and they're known for other crops besides cotton. But of course, because they did not grow cotton, and that meant that they were not of the planter class. And they actually kind of liked having that distinction, especially when it came to slavery itself, although they aspired to maybe to have enough money to buy one or two themselves. But in actuality, based on the economy, that wasn't possible in most instances. So that's what also kind of sets it apart from the rest of the South, just in terms of their sustainability, despite not really being part of what eventually would become a capitalist system. So they were able to hold on in lots of ways to a lot of the traditions that got passed along. And one historian, for instance, Carswell, who lived in Chipley, he was a journalist, and he published lots of mostly pamphlets, about the family autobiography as well as the region itself. And so he was kind of key factor, having interviewed him several times, whether it had to do with the Civil War and the lack of any or few battles in Wiregrass Country. Primarily, he was saying that his ancestors actually who fought or for the South, that they actually were like on salt detail to go to the ocean there, the Gulf, and and basically collect salt for the military, and didn't really see much action. And as a matter of fact, just north of Tallahassee, where I am now, in Thomasville, where they did have plantations, because like Tallahassee being closer to the waterways, but according to the history I read, that they did not succeed from the Union when, prior to the Civil War occurring. So there's a lot of things that kind of distinguishes it, and especially in terms of how those plantations in Thomasville came to be hunting plantations. Although that's another gripe I had with the press at the time, because basically the copy editor insisted on calling them plantations and taking out the hunting part throughout the book. But the thing is that people were dedicated to coming to the hunting plantations. Basically, we're talking about dignitaries, kings and queens, presidents of the United States, Eisenhower in particular, often would visit the hunting plantations. They called them northern hunting plantations. And that's why the workers there were so proud of being associated with this kind of plantation, primarily because coming with a different sentiment, the interest in education. They built them schools, they built them churches, one of the biggest, and probably people wouldn't associate it with ordinarily with an African American presence, because it has a steeple and everything there on Highway 219 coming into Tallahassee. And so that was kind of proof, as well as how the people who grew up on those hunting plantations, mentioned that during the Depression years, that they were the only people who were still receiving wages. And I do have a slide to share as well. So let me recall how that's done. Just a second, I hope. Okay, and so here we go. Although not quite from where I hoped to start. Well, I kind of gave you a kind of synopsis of the Wiregrass region, but I also included this slide home primarily because it's wiregrass, a bundle of wiregrass that a student who lived on a farm in the panhandle of Florida said, oh, we have lots of that growing on our farm. And I've had it for about 20 years. And I don't know why other people haven't thought about using it as kind of, I guess you could say, household decor. But in the same token, I think it's important to kind of mention my schooling when it came to wiregrass. Yeah, I won't hold off because I know the time is passing in terms of mentioning the cemeteries that I visited. My students would call me the graveyard teacher because I would pass around because a lot of them had graveyard decorations. And actually, for example, if you can see, I guess see the screen here. Are you able to see? It's a graveyard decoration. I've seen them in books and I never knew I would own one, but a savvy friend who lived in Indiana actually did a lot of antiquing and she saw one at an antique shop and therefore she basically knew how to play the game. And so she didn't go, oh my God, I can't believe you have one, but actually was saying, oh, what's a peculiar object? How much would that cost? And he said $28. And so she, but she knew how much I, would savor having and owning one. And so she presented it to me. And the other thing about Wiregrass Country is that you have to give, and I think much mention has been made about Smokey the Bear and the allegiance people formed, and toward, preventing forest fires. And we know now, especially what's happening in, right now in terms of these fires and the devastation they cause. And this burning of the fire was stigmatized once again, because the wiregrass farmers were always burning and they thought it was a superstition, but it wasn't until the hunting plantations realized that they weren't getting many quails. And so they had someone come to study and basically say, well, that's because there's no burning taking place and you have to burn the fire, burn the forest. And from there, the realization then in terms of the native people, Tallahassee, for instance, 10,000, what I understand is 10,000 acres of land in Tallahassee had been actually grown by the native people. I know some mention was made about the creeks, but even prior to the creeks, the 10,000-year history or so in terms of this region that existed. And so they intentionally burned the wiregrass. And so just in terms of maybe having had the connections with the settlers, that is why that tradition of burning the forest, for many complicated reasons, for sustenance in terms of hunting, and especially I think as mentioned, the pest management, especially snakes. And then as a result though, in terms of the cultivating of the land, one of the heinous results is that people are still hoping to see an ivory-billed woodpecker or red-cockaded woodpecker. These are distinct because they required old pine to nest in. And I know Louisiana, I think the last sighting was in about the 1940s, but they have a lot of devices in the woods hoping to hear the call of the woodpeckers. And I did want to show, although I put it on so I could scroll easily. Yeah, and this kind of duplicates what you already seen, of course, other than the color, but I just wanted to explain my cover on the paperback book. Do not be turned off by the cover. It looks like, just as Jessica presented it, like, oh, who wants to read that? But, this is the cover that I would love to have, because you might see the little wisp of smoke there. And I thought that it would be certainly of interest, especially now in terms of environmentalists, and people would have to open it up to see what it was about, because there would be a question mark, at least to begin. So it's kind of unfortunate, I think. And the thing is that a photographer, a local photographer actually took the photo. And that was another reason that I really thought that it should carry more meaning. And then as relates to the controlled burns, and I guess this is part of the autobiographical aspect of what I'm telling you, is because, driving those 20,000 miles, this is the first time I saw someone actually doing a controlled burn on her own. And so I had to stop the car and run over and find out, what laws she might be breaking, or what her explanation. And it was fulfilling to find out about these controlled burns, because it's by necessity that they had to reduce the hazardous fuel. That's what it's called in terms of all the underbrush that these kind of forest fires were meant to be. And so, but you can get a certificate to burn when other and so you take a class. Now you can take a class online or in person to actually be able to get a certificate in order to burn without liability. So they actually have liability protection to go along with these individuals who are certified to burn. And the only time I actually got to see a burning occur, because we have right near the border here, Nature Conservatory, where they, advertise, for families to come and watch the controlled burning of the woods kind of thing. And I also have this slide about the graveyards and cemeteries. This one is in Newton, Alabama. And while these decorations, I think people thought might hold some of the actual things that might have belonged to the deceased, it was very common, in terms of the Wiregrass, for me to actually notice all the things that were part of the decorative art. And here, I think if you can, maybe if I, nope, probably can't enlarge it, but this site actually is a way for me to explain how, you might pay more attention to maybe some of the graveyards you pass and see objects. There's, you might see toys. I have one like a teddy bear, and the fact that they're dynamic sites. There was a site, not the county over from Tallahassee, that I would visit all of the time, because it was forever changing. And I'm not meaning in terms of new burial sites or burial grounds, but that people would come, and if they had one of the concrete layers, it would change colors. It would also maybe sometimes have writing on it about the deceased and being in the military. And I saw maybe recent where rakings had taken place, and and so people are really still paying homage, to their deceased members. And it's not just on Decoration Day. I actually didn't know what Decoration Day was, because it really is around Memorial Day in the South. And I was driving the roads, and I didn't know where to stop on Sunday. And I guess they say the Lord will provide. And I stopped, and I went to a service at an African-American church right outside of Thomasville here. And after the service, the people gathered their flowers and things, and they went out into the cemetery by the church, and they began to, clean, as a group, the church cemetery. And so, of course, with my curiosity, then that's how I learned. And then from, reading other texts. And as it turned out, when it comes to Memorial Day, I guess most people maybe know historically that African Americans had the first memorial service after the Civil War, and that's how Memorial Day came about. So these slides are primarily, kind of talking points, just to kind of say things about Wiregrass from a more maybe personal perspective. And the thing about the graveyard more so is that that's where I saw my first stand of Wiregrass. It was just growing, and so I run to the Nature's Conservatory and say, why, since they cannot burn and do not burn the cemetery ground, why Wiregrass was growing there? I don't know, Dr. Olliff, whether or not you, have maybe a answer or solution to what I was told about the wiregrass that grew there in the cemetery.
No, I can't answer your question. I'm unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, it was actually good-looking stand of wiregrass, but infertile because there was no burning. And so, and they said that they mow the graveyard. Their suspicion was that they mow the graveyard, which meant that it would just sprout again on schedule every year. But I guess basically a feat, right? So I guess these are just some, I think, curiosities that I had to begin with, and that I wanted to maybe provide some explanation for. And you might have heard the Fasola singing, and it turns out that over in Ozark, Alabama, so this is related to Alabama, Wiregrass is the only surviving African Americans who still sing the 4 notes, the shape notes. And you might have noticed that they first sing the notes and then they sing the lyrics, and they form a kind of square that they sit around, and everyone has signed up to conduct a song. And so at their turn, then they walk. They have a special way of delivery, and it's something that is, I guess you could say, a relic. And the reason that it's important as well is because due to segregation, Judge Jackson here and other African American songwriters were not able to submit their own lyrics and songs for a songbook, and so they decided to create their own called the Colored Sacred Harp. So, and you'll be able to find other things on YouTube if you want to hear more of the music. But I think so. There'll be time for questions and answers. I'll end on this note. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Any
McGregory.
questions? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free. There's a Q&A box, or there is a chat box. You can type them in. And if you have a question about the book, I did add a link to WMA's website, so you can purchase the book if you're interested. And I have a question that popped up while we're waiting. Dr. Olliff, you said that there is a mound here in Houston County. Where is that? I don't think I've even heard of it before.
It's in Columbia, adjacent to the Chattahoochee River, at the mouth of the Amussie Creek, and in that little park. If you start heading down Highway 95 and make a left into Amussie Creek Park, that mound is back in there. It was excavated, just a temporary trench was dug in 1959 by the Smithsonian. They hired somebody from this area to, I think that's how it goes. They hired somebody to dig an exploratory trench, and they took out, I want to say, 11,000 artifacts. And because they believed that that mound was going to be inundated with the building of the new dam, but it wasn't. And so just recently being the last 10 years or so, Dr. Steve Harris, who is an ear, nose, and throat guy, who's very active, lives in Dothan, very active in prehistoric archaeology and in underwater archaeology with the University of West Florida and all their work in Pensacola Bay. He has been doing a lot of work with the Corps of Engineers to get them to secure that area, cut down the trees, fill in that trench, and make that mound available again. But yeah, it's down there in Columbia.
But it's not, I mean, can you access it, or is there markers for it? Or
there is a marker.
You're just gonna look for it pretty hard.
Yeah, historical marker. But I think they've been kind of like, yeah, we'll talk about it, but we don't really want anybody to find out where it is. I think they're really afraid of people robbing the joint.
Oh yeah.
Going out there and digging, because it's a little bit on the remote side.
Okay, there's a question here for Jessica. Did you use native plant material from the wiregrass in the making of the paper for your book?
No, that was one of the original proposals for the book, but I think that wiregrass might not have enough like cellulose fiber to make really good paper, so I decided that, and also I was limited by time and budget, so the paper in the book is French paper, which is the last small batch commercially made paper made in the United States in Michigan, and so it's small sourced commercial made paper, and I would actually love to come and try to make paper out of wiregrass itself, but I realized that was going to be a endeavor that took as long as making a book project, so I decided to stick to the book project.
Well, it really is. I think Dr. Olliff said it best, but this is truly special, and I'm very proud of how it turned out, and it's a prized possession at the moment.
And it's really thanks to Holly, who was the original inspiration of the whole thing. So it's really Holly has been an advocate for Dothan and the Wiregrass region since I've met her in Tuscaloosa. So it's like cool that it's really great that she's such an advocate for the region and making art and promoting art. And
thank you. Yeah, it feels very full circle to have all the Tuscaloosa folks in the show at WMA. But I think I don't see any more questions coming through. Any comments? Are there any things that you want to chat about with each other? Or if not, I think we're probably good to go. This will be that is recorded, and we'll be able to share this on YouTube probably next week.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks to Dr. McGregory and Dr. Olliff. I mean, your research and work in the region is really fundamental and keystone. So thank you for joining this artist talk tonight. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for hosting us, and thank you for having us on.
Yeah. You're muted, Dr. McGregory. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Well, just thanking both of you for your dedication, and bringing in another interdisciplinary context for Wiregrass Country foremost. So just want to thank you for bringing it to, I guess you could say, a larger stage. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.